Okay, so that was my news. You said you had something about Huawei?
Oh boy, yes, all kinds of stuff about Huawei. Last week, President Trump issued a blacklist order, specifically zeroing in on Huawei and their ties to the Chinese government. And so, with that order, he's basically saying that no American companies can be doing business with Huawei. And so this all sort of hit the street on Friday, and everybody was freaking out. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? It's like instantly stop working with Huawei. And Google and Alphabet, actually, the parent company of Google, came out and said, all right, we are severing our ties right now. We're complying with this order, and we will no longer be working with Huawei. Now, there was an update that came out on Sunday. And there is a 90-day period, that kind of a grace period, that is being allowed. And so they are continuing. Not Android. Google is continuing to work with Huawei during those 90 days. But this is really what it means. So first of all, they first said there will be no Play Store, and there will be no app supports. That means Gmail, Chrome, Doc, Sheets, all that Google suite would no longer work on any Huawei phones.
Can you download it even though it doesn't come with it?
You can download it now, and you should be able to sideload it, but whether or not it will be blocked is another question. So I'm not sure if the APK knows what kind of phone it's on, because if the APK, let's say I'm using a Chrome web browser, and if the APK in there can say whether you're on a Huawei P30 Pro, then it may block it. If it can't, then you should be able to sideload. But this is a big deal. I mean, the Huawei phones are on a tear. They're the #2 selling company of Android phones in the world. Actually, I think of phones, period, in the world, not just Android. So #1 is Samsung, and now Huawei is #2. They've
Wow.
surpassed Apple. So it's a big deal that the United States is saying we're not doing any more business with Huawei, and that includes Google.
So that begs the question, how are you going to download apps if there's no Play Store? Does China have a special store for all of their Android phones?
Well, that's interesting because they do. They do have a separate store, but it's still based on Android. And the majority of apps that people in China download, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it is found in this other store, but they're still Android APKs. And
Mhm.
so as soon as this support gets cut off, it doesn't mean that your Huawei phone's going to stop working. It just means your Huawei phone's not going to be supported anymore. So that means security issues. You're not going to get that support. It means maybe something stops working and nobody's going to fix it. So that's a big deal. And they did on Sunday, they came out and they said, look, we've got this 90 days, and there it does sound like maybe the Play Store might still be available, but it just won't support anything. So the details are still a little bit sketchy. It was first, nope, hard stop, no more. Then it was 90 days. Now they're saying, well, maybe the Play Store will still be there. Huawei did come out and have a few official statements about this situation. And one said, the very first one they said on Friday, we've been ready for this. We've been expecting this to happen, and we're totally ready. And they've come out and said they have their own operating system that they're
Whoa.
working on. But there's no way it's going to be ready.
I wonder if
Yeah,
it's forked from Android or if it's just from based from the ground up or
I,
Linux or how the heck.
I have no idea. I think they can still use some basic kernels of Android. And what's interesting is there is a program, and I'm just looking to see what it's called here. It's AOSP, Android Open Source Project.
Okay.
So Android has basically, or Google's taken Android and said, this is open source. Whoever wants to use this source code, here you go. And so they have access to that ASOP. But right now, when the 90 days is over, they won't have access to that anymore, but they'll still have all the old information. So they probably, guaranteed, will not be supported in Android Pie or anything after that until this ban is lifted.
Well, this is crazy because we know Samsung has Tizen phones, but they're not
Yes.
popular. I
No,
don't
they're
know
terrible.
one person that has a Tizen operating system. Everybody loves
Yeah.
Android.
It's like their little flip phones are Tizen, and same with their smartwatches. They're all Tizen, and that's one of the biggest companies in the world. Still hasn't been able to create an operating system where people say, you know what, it's just as good as Android. No, not coming close. So here's another interesting thing. So I would call this propaganda, but
Uh,
there was an article that was published in China by the government, and it basically says that the new operating system is going to be ready by the fall. It's going to be way better than Android, and
wow.
any Android app can be recompiled and it will be 60% faster on this new
Really?
operating system than on Android. So I'd like to be like, sure, go ahead. I'd
Yeah.
love to see something be 60% faster.
Faster. Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing about the free market. I don't know if I agree with this because really, you should just let the market be, and to ban people from using Android is a little bit. It's a little bit sketchy of Google and President Trump banning, the use here because, it stops competition, and we all know that competition creates better phones. So
Some could
I
argue it's creating competition because it's creating another operating system.
okay,
But
yeah.
I think it's actually, this is a huge blow to Huawei, huge blow, because Android is basically free minus the amount of resources they have to put into supporting it. But it's not something they have to build from the bottom up, which it sounds like they now need to do. So that
Yeah.
is a huge cost savings. And now they're going to have to put that into their equipment and pass on the costs to their customers that they typically wouldn't have had to in the past. So it means increases in phone prices. It also means probably worse software. Well,
Yeah.
definitely worse software. How is it going to be supported? There's all kinds of big questions. And you know what, Dan? These phones are nice. Like, I don't know if you have
Yeah,
seen the
I've tried
P30
them.
Pro, but it's got a, what is it, 50 times zoom? Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
It's pretty cool. Okay, so
Yeah.
I have a story about a Chinese programmer. So back at the University of Alberta, where I did my computer science undergrad, there was a ton of people from China that paid the extra high tuition for out-of-state tuition.
Hmm.
And they all came from China, and they were so smart, Matt. It was insane. Like they would
Yeah.
be in the computer lab all the time. And I remember I was taking this operating systems class where we were like deep in the architecture. It wasn't easy like object-oriented programming at all. It was pretty intense stuff. And I was battling with this one project night and day. And I got stuck, and there was this girl from China next to me that was working on the computer in the computer station over. And I just leaned over to her and I said, "Hey, like, have you figured this thing out?" And she just looked at my code and just pointed and said, "Oh, that's all you have to do is switch that." And she could read my code so quickly. It was
Wow.
insane. She just found in my nest of loops exactly what I was doing wrong. And she said, "Switch that." I
Yeah.
compiled it, and sure enough, it worked. And I just leaned back and said, "Man, these people are smart. Like they are sending their best over to North America." And if that's how good they were, I can't imagine how good they are over there. Like I was really, really impressed.
Well, that's a good question too. I mean, all these employees, Huawei is huge, especially here in Canada. And you know what, Dan? They're not huge with making cell phones in Canada. They're huge with telecommunications
Telecommunications, 5G, yeah.
hardware, huge, and they're all over Canada. But apparently, they're also in the United States, not nearly as embedded as in Canada. But Wyoming and Oregon both have invested a lot in Huawei infrastructure. And so, this ban, they have 90 days to swap out all that hardware. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
90 days. Go for it. Change an entire state's worth of infrastructure in 90 days. Good luck. Like,
It's
it's going to cause
that's pretty
chaos.
crazy.
And
Okay,
then
so yeah.
I was just going to say the last question is, what about Americans working for Huawei? There are thousands of them. Do they suddenly have to quit their jobs? that's another question that's come up here. So
Yeah, these trade tariffs, they've been hitting our 401ks. They've been turning people's lives upside down. It's been crazy.